Well, thank you very much for this invitation. Happy to see a lot of very young faces who are here as journalists or studying journalism. Press is not formally recognized in the Constitution of India, but Article 19 gives a fundamental right to freedom of expression. So under the freedom of expression, the Supreme Court has interpreted that this includes the press. The press originally had very little restrictions in our original constitution. But in 1951, Jawaharlal Nehru, who was then Prime Minister, was quite irritated by articles written in the Organizer and by Ramesh Thapar. So he moved an amendment to the Constitution, where which was passed by the then Provisional Parliament in 1951, stating that that all freedom of expression shall be subject to restrictions on grounds of national integrity, national security, defamation, public order, and so a variety of restrictions were placed. So the first thing you should know is that there is no fundamental right to the freedom of the press or freedom to speak. That was put under restriction by no less than a person whom sometimes is adulated as a great Democrat and so on, that is Jawaharlal Nehru, and that is the first amendment to the Constitution. The second threat to the freedom of the press came when Article 352, called the Declaration of the State of Emergency, was invoked by Mrs. Indira Gandhi as Prime Minister in 1975. And then in the name of declaring an emergency in the country, the fundamental rights were suspended. And one of the things that got suspended was the freedom of the press. And so a censorship was brought in. And the same censorship which the British had used during World War II in India, that put restrictions on the press. And we had the spectacle of press putting out their newspapers with blank front pages because the items that they wanted to put on the front page was not allowed by the censors. So the suppression of the freedom of the press was at its maximum in our history since 47, during the state of emergency, which lasted from June 26, 1975 to March 24, 1977. There was a relaxation after Mrs. Gandhi declared elections. So February and part of March was already a relaxed atmosphere where the press was publishing more freely, but the formal deletion of the order on gagging the press ended in March 24th when the Janata Party got elected. Thereafter, to protect the freedom of the people as well as the right of the press, the Janata government headed by Mr. Morarji Desai, they amended that constitution to ensure that if there is ever an emergency declared, it will not be by a resolution of the cabinet and the president signing it, but by showing that there was an armed rebellion in the country, not just a political event which any prime minister could use as an excuse for declaring emergency. For example, Jayaprakash Narayan's movement against corruption was used as a basis for declaring emergency by Mrs. Gandhi. But now nobody can do that unless you can show an armed rebellion has taken place in the country. And for that, the state of emergency is necessary. Now, fighting for the freedom of press has been a long battle since 1947. As I told you, the First Amendment to curb the power of the press came with the First Amendment in 1951. And in that course, the emergency is something that our younger generation may not know because the years of those who fought the emergency, they were not in power. And so our textbooks and so on do not reflect what happened. The state of emergency meant 140,000 people in jail without trial, which is unheard of in any democratic country. Most of the prominent leaders of the opposition, including Jayaprakash Narayan, Morarji Desai and the others, were in jail. And there was no hope of this ever coming out. The press was gagged, so people didn't know what had happened. And so in that context, since I went underground when the emergency was declared, and the police could not catch me, for a brief while I had disguised myself as a Sardarji with a beard and pagdi. And very often I used to go to Gujarat for rest and recuperation because Gujarat was being ruled by the Janata government, which refused to implement the emergency. And the person whom the underground network sent to receive me whenever I went to Gujarat was another person camouflaged and disguised as a Sardarji, and his name was Narendra Modi. So Narendra Modi and I moved around Gujarat as Sardarjis. And sometimes being a Sardarji was not easy because I didn't know Punjabi. And so in Delhi one day I was going in auto rickshaw and the Sardar driver asked me, Sajja ya Khabba? And I've never heard of Sajja and Khabba. So I didn't know what he meant, so I said, Siddha, Siddha. So twice he took me straight, and then he stopped the auto. When a third time I said, Siddha, Siddha, he said, he asked me in English, who are you? So now I thought I'll get caught. So I told him, no, I'm a Canadian Sardar, I don't know Punjabi. I was brought up in Canada. So he said, come with me. So I thought he was going to take me to the police station. But he actually took me to a restaurant and he said, I want a visa to go to Canada, can you help me? So that's how I escaped. Now, one of the things that Mr. Jayaprakash Narayan wanted me to do was escape abroad and go to England and America, because I had spent many years teaching in America at the Harvard University. So he knew that I know a lot of people in America and England. So he asked me, go abroad and you propagate there. So I asked them, what is the meaning of my going abroad and propagating? It's better for me to move around the country. He said, no, in India, and these are all communications via the underground, for which I have to thank the RSS, which had set up a network underground. And Jayaprakash used to send me letters, I used to reply. So Jayaprakash told me, no, if you go abroad, then in Britain there is BBC and other BBC, which everybody listens to in India nowadays. And if you go to America, there is Voice of America. So through that, you can inform our people what is going on. So anyway, I reluctantly agreed and I escaped abroad and went to America. I resumed my professorship at Harvard, which gave me a facility to go around America with an identity. And I found to my surprise that when I arrived in America, everybody in America thought that only smugglers and thieves and crooks are in jail. Not Jayaprakash Nayan or Moraji Desai or all these the then tall leaders of our opposition movement. But they thought that only smugglers and crooks and so on. And that was the propagation of our embassy. And since there was censorship, no news was coming out of India, so whatever the embassy was putting out was going on. And this is something which I found shocking. When I told people there, I set up an organization called for Indians for Democracy, and then Friends of India Society. And then we started holding meetings all over America. And then said 140,000 people in jail. Jayaprakash, whose name everybody knew in America, so did Moraji Desai. They are in jail. So this kind of propagation created a new awareness. The Indian Embassy tried very hard to do something. They cancelled my passport, but I refused to return my passport. And so my passport did not have the stamp cancelled. So all friendly governments allowed me to travel. So I traveled from America to Canada, from Canada to Britain, and came back to America. And they could not stop me. So I went on campaigning, and ultimately the overseas Indians became ready to inform all their parents and so on what was going on. At that time, the press played a key role, but that was the foreign press. The BBC and the Voice of America I have to especially thank. Of course, New York Times and Washington Post were not available to Indian people, but Mrs. Gandhi used to give it very great importance. So now, when New York Times and Washington Post and London Times, they started writing editorials against Mrs. Gandhi. And, but at the same time, by the time I had finished with my campaign, about almost 1 year was over of the emergency, and it didn't look like the emergency was going anywhere. So, of course, when I was in America, I was not a Sardar. I had taken off all was in normal clothes as usual. But I found in India, people were getting arrested. All of the underground leaders were getting arrested. George Fernandez got arrested. Dattappan Tegri got arrested. Nanaji Deshmukh got arrested. So soon, Americans began saying that you are a third world country. So what is the meaning of democracy to your people? So why are you fighting for it? You better settle down in America and start teaching here again, instead of showing that there is any revolt in India. Now, I could not show any event because neither the newspapers were doing that, nor there was any outside overt protests in our country. People were being picked up regularly, young boys and girls were picked up. They were tortured, they were subject to cigarette butts and so on. And then there was also this Nasbandi program going on where even 5-year-old boys were picked up and 80-year-old men were picked up to do Nasbandi because each collector had a quota he had to fulfill per day according to Sanjay Gandhi. So they caught anybody they could. And they did Nasbandi. All these horrors were not being reported at all. And the Western press began, I began getting stale because I kept on repeating the same thing. But the question began to grow louder and louder. Nothing is happening in India. So why don't you settle down here and forget about democracy in a third world country? So at that time, I decided I must do something which shows that we have a network. And that is when I made a decision that I will come back to India. And by then, Mrs. Gandhi had put 18 cases against me and declared me proclaimed offender. She gave my name to Interpol also, so I had the Interpol notice. But I have to thank the American government, the British government, they refused to recognize it. So therefore, I had no problem there. but I became notorious. She even put a reward on my head, which at that time was the highest in the history of India. So I became a very important person for Mrs. Gandhi. And they were my house was attached. All my car, my equipment, kitchen equipment, everything was attached and taken away. They could not take away my house because it didn't belong to me. But my wife and 2 children who were in India, they suffered. One of them has become a journalist, whose name is Suhasini Haidar. She must be here somewhere. And she was a little 3-year-old girl at that time. She was a 3-year-old girl at that time, and they used to follow her to school also. And keep asking, have you seen your father? Have you seen your father? So one day she said, yes, I saw him last night. So immediately there was a raid in my house. And they started going to every room. So my wife said to them, I've told you he's in America. Why are you taking all this trouble? They said, no, your daughter said that she saw him last night. So my wife called Suhasini and asked, did you tell the police like this? She said, yes. So she said, where did you see him? She said, I saw him in my dreams last night. So the police got fed up. So it was a good sign to see that people had begun opposing. So I thought I must come. What shall I do in India if I go back to India? Living in America was pointless because people are getting stale with my lectures. They don't want to hear the same thing over and over again. So I wanted to do something to show there is an underground, there's a rebellion, there's an underground press, and so on. So I decided the best way is I come to India, enter Parliament. I go and sign the register for my attendance, and then go into the Parliament, the Rajya Sabha. At that time I was in Rajya Sabha. Later on I came to Lok Sabha, but that time I was in Rajya Sabha. I came, and it was the first day of Parliament, which is 10th of August. On that particular year of 1976, 10th of August. So I entered Parliament. Now, when I entered Parliament, all the people sitting before me were the thugs of the emergency, like Bansi Lal and Om Mehta and so on. Mrs. Gandhi was not there. She was in that time in Lok Sabha. So they all saw me. And they were so shocked, they kept staring at me. And that time, in the session, the Vice President of India, who was the chairman, was reading out the obituary list, who all died in the intercession period, because it was the first day of the Parliament. So at the last name when he spoke, I got up and said, I have a point of order. During the intercession period, democracy also died. You should have had an obituary notice for that also. So the Vice President said, no, this is no point of order. Then I said, I'm walking out. Then he said, everybody will stand for 2 minutes silence. And all these people stood in 2 minutes silence. They were so frightened that I was coming to do something that later on, after the emergency was told, I asked Om Mehta, because when he saw me, he started sliding below the desk where he was sitting. And so did Brahmanand Reddy, who was the Home Minister. So I asked them, why did you slide under your desk? He said, we thought you had come to throw an hand grenade, like Bhagat Singh or something, you see. So they had fear in their mind. And when the chairman said, stand up for 2 minutes silence, they all stood up. At that time, I walked out. And I went to the railway station, caught a train to Bombay, and from that I took a car and went to Gorakhpur and then crossed into Nepal. The Nepal Raja was my student at Harvard, so he gave me a plane and I went to America from there. But what happened is, suddenly in America I became a hero with the Americans. That, my God, there must be a terrific underground. Actually, I never used the underground except for escaping back to Nepal and so on. But in the plan of going to Parliament and all, I did myself, because if I had been caught, then the entire underground would have been exposed. But the real contribution for my coming to Parliament and leaving, which shocked Mrs. Gandhi, who herself told me after she returned to power in 1980, she told me that I declared the election because your event so shocked me also that you could do something like this. That means there's a strong underground, and therefore I decided to hold the elections. Now, but the effect would have been zero had not the press people, particularly foreign press, sitting in the press gallery of Parliament. They were told by my wife quietly that I'm coming and I'm going to make a statement and go away. And they all knew that I had warrant in my name, I had 18 cases, I had Interpol notice, I was in America, that I was going to appear in Parliament. I must give them credit, not one of them told the authorities that I was going to come to Parliament. And they were witnesses, and they all reported. Next day, Britain, France, Germany, United States, of course, Canada, everybody had front pages. Mrs. Gandhi exposed. She has lost control of India. So that is the first time I saw the contribution, the impact the press can have. And my whole coming and going would have been forgotten in the censorship, but for the press contribution at that time. Then, of course, a lot of press people in revolt were doing underground, they were distributing it. So I am telling you today that it is not an exaggeration to say the press is the fourth estate. That is government, that is the executive, judiciary, parliament, and the fourth is called the fourth estate. In Britain it was called fourth estate. And press is one of the pillars of democracy. And without the power of information being spread, no democracy can survive. And Thomas Jefferson had said, if it is a question of order with the free press or free press without order, I will always choose free press without order rather than order without free press. So free press has become an extremely important part. And you young people who are here, you are entering a profession which is one of the noblest professions in preserving the human rights of the country in terms of furthering the democracy that we are today. Because through the media, public knows and people become well informed, then of course they make the right choices. I think many of you do not remember, were not even born when the emergency was there, but I think the time has come that it should become part of our curriculum and to show how fragile our democracy is. All democracies are fragile, but we have survived. We have all these 70 years have managed to keep democracy or fight back. There were many other people also fought. Justice H.R. Khanna was person who was going to become the Chief Justice of Supreme Court. But as a judge before becoming, just 2 months before becoming Chief Justice, he gave a judgment saying the right to live is a fundamental right that no government can take away. And that laid the foundation for all over the world, people recognizing that there are now forces which are willing to fight for democracy. And he lost. Mrs. Gandhi did not give him the Chief Justice position, and he resigned. There were many such people who have not got prominence in our country. Then the final thing I will say, and especially since we are in Rajasthan, when the elections were declared, I had gone back to America, I had gone back to becoming a professor at Harvard. And when the elections declared, I said, I'm going back. Everybody said, are you mad? Mrs. Gandhi will win the election without difficulty. Because democracy, people's stomach must be full first. So many poor, poor people in the north of India. And only educated people are in the south of India. And therefore, democracy, she will get majority easily. But when the results came out, everybody was shocked. Because the whole of the north cleaned up the Congress party. Mrs. Gandhi herself was defeated by the constituency in Uttar Pradesh. Rajasthan, except for one person, Mr. Midha, he was the only one who won, but complete wipeout. Out of the 25 seats, 24 went to the Janata Party. Madhya Pradesh, all the seats went. Bihar, all the seats went. In fact, the poorest states of our country, they call it the Bimaru states, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh, and shortened it to Bimaru state. They voted 100% practically against Mrs. Gandhi, and that's how democracy came back. But the educated South, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra, Karnataka, they voted 100% for Mrs. Gandhi. So if everybody had voted like South India, then there would have been no democracy today. It would have been Mrs. Gandhi, after that Sanjay Gandhi, after that Tommy Gandhi, their dog, like that would have gone on. So let us not underestimate our people as being illiterate or uneducated. This long tradition of democracy was not given to us by the British. It has been our tradition from the Panchayat Raj system. We invented the democracy, in fact, this country, and that's in the blood. And if you don't become anglicized, you will definitely act according to the ancient values of India. And therefore, let us remember that it is the people of India and the most uneducated part of India which, by their voting, produced restored democracy to India, and therefore a free press. Free press is an essential part of democracy. Without free press, nobody can have democracy, and that is why we should celebrate every time there is a move towards freeing the press. And at the same time, let us understand we all have responsibilities to see that just because I disagree with your views, I don't condemn you for it and try to eliminate you for it. We should respect opinions which are properly framed and put across. There should be a genuine debate. We should learn to debate. We should learn to have views, shared with people who have different views, and that's how democracy will go. And I personally feel very much vindicated, because later, after that, when I went to stand in Bombay, a complete outsider in Bombay, the people gave me the largest majority, and I won it once again in 1980, when we were all losing in our party, but some of us won in the Janata Party. That time also the people of Bombay, remembering the struggle for emergency, they voted me again and gave me victory. So let us celebrate democracy, and for them, the soldiers of democracy happen to be you press people, and therefore we all must respect the profession to the maximum. Thank you very much.